We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Chaf Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 120b. And the previous summit, the Gemara said that the pasuk of V'chol Basio Reshes Nachala, which says that any daughter who inherited property she had to marry from within her father's tribe, that only applied to that first generation. It did not apply to future generations. And the Gemara asked, how do we know that only applied to that generation? And the Gemara said, we know that from the pasuk Zeh HaDavar. When it says Zeh HaDavar, it means that it only applies in this particular generation. So the Gemara asked, we find Zeh HaDavar also by Shchutei Chutz. That's the prohibition to shecht kachim outside of the Beis HaMikdash, but that applies for all generations. Why does that apply for all generations? And the Gemara says it's different over there because it actually says L'dorosam, so therefore it says specifically that it's going to be for all generations. And the Gemara now continues, what about Zeh HaDavar de Rashi Hamatos? What about the Zeh HaDavar that we find by Rashi Hamatos? And the Rashbam here brings the full pasuk. Zeh HaDavar de Rashi Hamatos Tichsiv. It's written in the pasuk. Vayedaber Moshe el Rashi Hamatos Livnei Yisrael Leimor Zeh HaDavar Asher Tziva Hashem Ish Ki Yad or Neder. The pasuk is talking about Nedarim over there. So over there also Hachanami de Lo Yehei Noeg Ela B'Dor Zer. You're going to say that in that case also it only applies to this one generation. Amar Lei said back to him, Ahu Yolif Zeh Zeh Mehasam. Well, that's learned out from a Gzeir Shaveh. It says Zeh over here, and it says Zeh by Shchutei Chutz. Just like by Shchutei Chutz, it's for all generations, so too over here, it is going to be for all generations. But the Gemara continues, Hainami, in this case as well, by the pasuk of Echol Basio Reshes Nachala, Leilif Zeh Zeh Mehasam. Why don't we make the same Gzeir Shaveh of Zeh HaDavar and say just like Zeh HaDavar by the case of Shchutei Chutz applies for all generations, so too the Zeh HaDavar that applies by Echol Basio Reshes Nachala should be for all generations. But the Gemara says, Haimai, what kind of comparison are you making? B'Shlom Mahasam, it makes sense over there to say there's a Gzeir Shaveh, meaning to say there's a Gzeir Shaveh between the case of Zeh HaDavar of Rashi Hamatos and Zeh HaDavar of Shchutei Chutz, because it's drich l'gzeir shaveh, because the gzeir shaveh is needed, as we're going to see in a moment. But over here, l'mai yitzrich, over here, there is no need for the gzeir shaveh for any other reason. Lishto kramine, what should happen is the pasuk should just be totally silent. Don't write zeh hadavar at all. V'anoyadana, then I would have known de l'dorosu that it's for all generations. And so again, the fact that it says zeh hadavar and there's no real need for any gzeir shaveh, that shows that v'chol ba'as yoreshes nachala is only for this generation, for this one generation. But again, the zeh hadavar by Rashi Hamatos and the Zeh HaDavar by Shchutei Chutz, that's used for this Gzeir Shaveh. That's why we assume that both of them are for all generations. And the Gemara continues, my Gzeir Shaveh, what is this Gzeir Shaveh that we're talking about, that we say we need to make a Gzeir Shaveh between the case of Rashi Hamatos by Nedarim and the case of Shchutei Chutz? And the Gemara continues, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Nemar Kan Zeh HaDavar v'Nem Lahalan Zeh HaDavar. It says Zeh HaDavar here, it says Zeh HaDavar further on. Ma Lahalan Aaron Uvonav v'Chol Yisrael. Just like further on, it says that it applies to Aaron and his children and all of Klal Yisrael. Afkan Aaron Uvonav v'Chol Yisrael. So too over here, it applies to Aaron and his children and all of Klal Yisrael. Umakan Rashi Hamatos, and just like over here, by the case of the Nedarim, where it says Zeh HaDavar of Rashi Hamatos, it says the heads of the tribes. Lahalan, so too further on, Rashi Hamatos, it means the Rashi Hamatos, it means the heads of the tribes, and the Gemara will explain now what all of this means. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Malahalan Aaron Uvanav v'Chol Yisrael, just like further on, it says Aaron and his children and all of Klal Yisrael, Afkan Aaron Uvanav v'Chol Yisrael, so too over here, Aaron and his children and all of Klal Yisrael. What is the meaning of that drasha? Lamai Hilchasa, for what practical halach are we saying that all of Klal Yisrael applies when it comes to Nedarim? Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Lomer, what the Gzeir Shaveh is saying is as follows, Shahafaras Nedarim b'shlosh hadyotos. We mean to say that Hafaras Nedarim, again, this is the pasuk of Zeh HaDavar by Rashi Hamatos, is talking about Nedarim, and we're saying it's not only Rashi Hamatos, it's not only the heads of the tribes, rather we learn from the other Zeh HaDavar that it's Aaron, Uvana, v'Chol Yisrael. It's all of Klal Yisrael, meaning that Hafaras Nedarim, a person is able to be mater and neder b'shlosh hadyotos, with three regular individuals. You don't need the person to be a scholar, to be a dayan. Three regular individuals can convene a court in order to annul a vow, in order to make a vow permitted again. But the Gemara continues, V'ha Rashi Hamatos ksive, but doesn't it say the words Rashi Hamatos by Nedarim? It says the heads of the tribes. That sounds like you do need an expert. It sounds like it's not sufficient to use hadiotos. And the Gemara says to that, Kedo Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'Yachid Mumcha. It's like Rav Chisda said that Rabbi Yochanan said in a different context that we're talking about an individual who's an expert. Hachanami here also b'Yachid Mumcha. If you have an individual who's an expert, they can annul the vows, and what that means to say is three regular individuals are able to be mater the neder, but one person can do it if that person is an expert. And the Gemara continues, Umakan Rashi Hamatos, and just like over here by Nedarim, the phrase Rashi Hamatos is used indicating the heads of the tribes, Aflahalon Rashi Hamatos, so too, further on, also Rashi Hamatos, meaning when it comes to Shchutei Chutz, we also apply this idea of Rashi Hamatos, and the Gemara again asks, Lamai Hilchasa, for what practical halachic matter are we saying Rashi Hamatos applies when it comes to Shchutei Chutz? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Lomar Sheyesh She'ela Behektish. What we're saying is, there's a concept of She'ela, there's a concept of asking and undoing when it comes to Hektish. And the Rashbam explains, Sheyesh She'ela Behektish, that there's a concept of asking and undoing when it comes to Hektish, meaning, Kemoshe Yesh She'ela Ben Nedarim. We're comparing here to Nedarim. Just like by Nedarim you can ask and undo a neder, to Nedarim Ksiv Lo Yachel Devaro, it says by Nedarim Lo Yachel Devaro, V'hu Adin L'chol Hekdeshos, that's true by all of Hektish, Shem Shachad Kachim B'chutz, meaning, let's say a person would shecht Kachim outside of the Beis HaMikdash, then it's Chayiv Kares, and that would make him liable to Kares. V'yachar Kach Holach Eitzel Chacham Lahater Lo Hekdesho, but then he goes to a Chacham to undo the Hektish, make it that it wasn't Hektish at all. Umatzah Lo Pesach Shel Charot, and is able to find some opening of regret that allows him to undo the fact that it's Hektish. V'yakar Es HaHektish Meikaro, and so now this Chacham undoes, uproots the Hektish from the very beginning. V'avdek Hektish Tos, he makes it essentially like a case of Hektish Tos, like a case where a person was Makdish something by mistake. Igloi Milsal Mafreya to Lo Have a Hektish Me'olam, we now say retroactively, it wasn't Hektish at all. Upater Mikares, and he would actually be Pater from Kares in such a situation. That's what it means that there's She'ela Behektish. We apply the rules of Nedarim to Hektish as well. V'hu Adin L'chol Davar HaKadosh B'motzei Sfasav, this would be true with anything that has to do with Hektish, that the person makes something holy through what he says from his mouth. Could go in Truma and Meiser, so it would apply to Truma and Meiser as well. The boy Mishal Alai, if the person wants, he can ask about it and undo it. The Chozrin Lativlan, it would go back to being Tavel, it would no longer be Truma and Meiser. Kedamina ben Nedarim V'shili Parakanodim and Ayerek, like we say in Meseches Nedarim. But the Gemara continues, Beis Shammai di'amri ein she'ela behektish, according to Beis Shammai, who say that there is no she'ela behektish. T'tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Meseches Nazir, Beis Shammai omrim hektish tos hektish. Beis Shammai say that if a person makes something hektish by mistake, it is still hektish, and therefore for sure you cannot do she'ela, because the whole idea of she'ela, the whole idea of asking a chacham to undo it, is to find some kind of regret, to find some kind of mistake. But if Beis Shammai say that even by mistake it still is hektish, so of course there's no concept of she'ela. Or Beis Hillel omrim eino hektish, but Beis Hillel say that it's not hektish if it was done by mistake. So the point over here is clearly Beis Shammai, they do not make this Gezerah Shavah, because if they made the Gezerah Shavah, they would say, just like there's a concept of She'ela by Nedarim, so too, there would be a concept of She'ela by hektish. Beis Shammai doesn't seem to have the Gezerah Shavah at all, and so the question is, Hayzev v'zem ayavdile, so what do Beis Shammai do with these psukim of Zeh HaDavar if they're not using it for a Gezerah Shavah? And the Gemara says, Zeh HaDavar de Shchutei Chutz, the pasuk of Zeh HaDavar by Shchutei Chutz, mi boi le, Beis Shammai uses that for the following: Al hashochet hu chayev, when a person shechts outside of the Beis Hamikdash, he's chayev for shchutei chutz. Ve'eno chayev al hamolek, but there's no chayev by molek. Malika is what they would do by bird offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. They would, instead of shechting the animal, instead the Kohen would use his finger in order to slaughter, so to speak, the bird, doing this process of malika. So there's no chayev of doing malika on a bird. Let's say you do malika on a bird outside of the Beis Hamikdash. There's not going to be that same chayev of shchutei chutz that you have when you shecht an animal outside of the Beis HaMikdash, that's hektish. And the Gemara continues, Zeh HaDavar de Rashi Hamatos, mi boi le l'chacham matir ve'in Baal matir, Baal mefer ve'in chacham mefer. When it comes to Zeh HaDavar by Rashi Hamatos, which is Zeh HaDavar by Nedarim, so Beis Shammai is going to use that for the idea that a chacham is able to be matir, meaning when a chacham undoes a neder, he uses the language of mutter. He says it's mutter lach, that neder is now permissible for you, but a Baal, a husband, does not use the language of mutter, rather the Baal uses a language of hafara, it's mufar, and similarly, Baal, a husband uses the language of mefer, uses the language of mufar, but a chacham does not. A chacham has to say mutter, he has to use the language of matir. And the Gemara continues, Beis Shammai deleslu Gezerah Shavah. Now, according to Beis Shammai, again, they don't hold of the Gezerah Shavah of Zeh HaDavar. So Hafaras Nedarim b'shlosh hedyotos minalahu. Where do they know that Hafaras Nedarim is done with 3 regular people? The whole source of that was the Gezerah Shavah to say that it's Aaron, Uvana, v'chol Yisrael, that it applies not only to the Rashi Hamatos, but even if you have 3 regular people. And the Gemara answers to that, Nafka Lahumi Detanya. They learn that out from the following Brisa. The Brisa brings the pasuk Vayadaber Moshe as Moadei Hashem el Bnei Yisrael. It says that Moshe said over the holidays of Hashem to Bnei Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, And the Rashbam explains, Al hashchita b'chutz chayiv kares, one who shechts an animal that's hektish outside of the Beis HaMikdash is chayiv kares. And the Rashbam adds, Da'afilu hashochet ov kachim b'chutz, even if somebody shechts a bird of kachim outside of the Beis HaMikdash, but if he does shchita and not malika, there also the person's going to be chayiv. Kedenafkalan b'Toras Kohanim uv'zvachim. We learned that out in Toras Kohanim and Zvachim. May o asher yishochet ve'eno chayiv al ha-malika shel of b'chutz. But the point is that if the person does the malika process on this bird outside of the Beis HaMikdash, the person is not chayiv. Again, that's what we learn out from the zeh hadavar by shchutei chutz. And the Rashbam continues, Chacham Matir. Again, the Gemara said the Zeh Hadavar by Rashi Hamatos teaches us that a Chacham is able to be Matir but not Meifir. Belashon Muterlach, meaning the Chacham uses the language of Muterlach. Kedichsiv lo yachel devaro. It says a person can't profane his words. If a person makes a neder, he has to keep the neder. And it means Huda lo yachel. He's not able to go against the neder. Aval acherim mochel lo, but others can forgive the neder for him. That's the idea of the Chacham Matir. Velashon heter mashma hula rabbanon hai lo yachel. The language of heter, that's what comes out from the pasuk of lo yachil according to the Rabbanon. And the Rashbam continues, V'tam yesh ladavar, there's also a reason behind this, Lefi sha'chacham eino mater b'yom shamo kamo baal below taina, el al yidei shemotzi l'charota v'okar es haneder meikaro. A chacham, when he undoes a neder, he can't just do it without any reason. He has to find some kind of regret in order to uproot the neder. Hilkach lo shayich bei lashon hafara. That's why you don't have a language of hafara by a chacham, because he's not simply annulling the vow, but he's undoing it in some fashion. El lashon hatara shehiter lo isra al yedei hora v'taina gemura. He's using some kind of a claim and issuing a ruling. Aval baal mefer leishto b'yom shama below charata. But a husband, he's able to be mefer on the day that he hears it without having any type of charata, any kind of regret within the neder. Migzeres hakasav, that's exeres hakasav. Kamo v'hefer es brisi kol dover kiyam hanekor misbatel below tam kare hafara. The word hafara is used anytime you're just mevatel something without a reason. You nullify something without a reason. V'yein chacham mefer, and similarly a chacham who's able to be mater is not mefer. Shemamar mufarlach lo amar klum. If a chacham says mufarlach, that's nothing. That's what we learn out again from Zehadavar. And the Rashbam continues, Hafaras Nedarim Begimel. The Gemara asked, how do you know the idea of Hataras Nedarim by 3 Hediotos? According to Beis Shammai, Hainu Hataras Chacham, even though it uses the word Hafara here, it really means Hataras Chacham. Devoinan Bezin, meaning that you need a Bezin to do this Hatara. Gimel Hediotos, either you need 3 regular people, O Yachad Mumcha, or you need an individual that's an expert. And the Rashbam continues, according to Beis Shammai, Hafara Ledoros. What about the idea that Hafara, the idea that by Nedarim that's Ledoros, that's something that applies for all generations? Again, if according to Beis Shammai there is no Gezerah Shaveh, so it says Zeh Hadavar when it comes to Nedarim by Rashi Hamatos. So how do we know that that applies Ledoros? The source above at the beginning of the Gemara was this Gezerah Shaveh to Shchutei Chutz, which Beis Shammai doesn't agree with. So to that the Rashbam says Nafko Luhu Beis Shammai Midi Dehavi Ashar Mitzvahs. Beis Shammai understand that it's the same as all other mitzvahs. Dehai Zeh Kevan Deikol Midrashe Lemuute Hafaras Chacham VeHataras Baal, because since we're already using this Zeh in a drasha to exclude the idea of Hafara by a Chacham, because a Chacham only does Hatara, and to exclude the idea of Hatara by a Baal, because a Baal only does Hafara, so Loma Matina Nami Doro, so therefore you're not going to use the Zeh Hadavar in that case to exclude the idea for all generations, and that's how we know that this applies for all generations. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Chav Aleph Amud Aleph.